5 Incredibly eccentric people. Number 5. Sir George Sidwell. Sir George Sidwell, father of the famous writer Dame Edith Sidwell, was a very bizarre man in many ways. He was a keen gardener. He actually studied garden design, and, annoyed by the wasps in his garden, he invented a pistol for shooting them. After he moved to Italy to avoid taxes in Britain, he refused to pay his new wife's debts, which resulted in her spending 3 months in prison. He was such an avid reader and collector of books that he had 7 libraries in his home. Other eccentricities included paying his son an allowance based on the amount paid by one of his forebears to his son during the Black Death, and trying to pay his son's Eton school fees with produce from his garden. But perhaps most bizarrely, Sir George had the cows on his estate stenciled in a blue and white Chinese willow pattern in order to make them look better. This is the notice that Sir George hung on the gate of his manor in Derbyshire, England: "I must ask anyone entering the house never to contradict me or differ from me in any way, as it interferes with the functioning of my gastric juices and prevents my sleeping at night." Number 4. Gerald Tyrwhitt Wilson. Also known as Lord Berners, Gerald Tyrwhitt Wilson got off to a strange start in life with a super-religious grandmother and a prejudiced mother. When he was 9, he was sent to boarding school where he had a relationship with an older boy. The relationship ended when Lord Berners vomited on him. As an adult, Berners became a relatively good composer and writer, and an extremely eccentric man. He had the pigeons at his stately home dyed in a variety of colors, and he kept a pet giraffe with which he would have afternoon tea regularly. His chauffeur had to fit his Rolls-Royce out with a harpsichord so Berners could play music whilst being driven around the countryside. He left his estate to his much younger companion, the equally eccentric Robert Heber Percy. Number 3. William Buckland. William Buckland is famous for 2 things. He was the first man to write a full account of a fossil, and he was incredibly eccentric when it came to animals and food. Buckland's love of natural history resulted in his house being something akin to a zoo. He filled it with animals of every kind, and he then proceeded to eat them all, and serve them to guests. He claimed to have eaten his way through every animal. The creatures that he said tasted worst were blue bottleflies, and mole. Various guests to dinner describe being served panther, crocodile, and mouse. A famous storyteller at the time, Augustus Hare, told this tale of Buckland. Talk of strange relics led to mention of the heart of a French king, Louis XIV, preserved at Newnham in a silver casket. Dr. Buckland, whilst looking at it, exclaimed, "I have eaten many strange things, but have never eaten the heart of a king before," and, before anyone could hinder him, he had gobbled it up, and the precious relic was lost forever. Number 2. Francis Edgerton. Francis Edgerton inherited his title along with a very large fortune in 1823. He became famous for his unusual dinner parties which he threw for dogs. All of the invited dogs would be dressed in the finest fashions of the day, including shoes. Another eccentricity was his manner of measuring time. Edgerton would wear a pair of shoes only once. When he was done with them, he would line them up in rows in order to count the passing days. He also kept pigeons and partridges which had their wings clipped so he could shoot them for sport even with failing eyesight. When he died, he left a large number of important documents on the subject of French and Italian literature to the British Museum, as well as a large financial donation to the Royal Society. Number 1. Jemmy Hearst. Jemmy, James, Hearst was so famous and eccentric in his own time, that King George III summoned him to tea. When he received the invitation, Hearst declined, stating that he was training an otter to fish. Eventually he did visit the king, where he threw a goblet of water over a courtier who was laughing. Hearst believed the man was having a fit of hysteria. The king gave him a number of bottles of wine from the royal cellar. Jemmy loved animals and he trained his bull to behave like a horse. The bull, named Jupiter, would draw his carriage about the village, and Hearst even rode him in fox hunts. Instead of dogs, He used pigs that he had trained as hunt dogs. He regularly blew a horn to invite the poor to his home for free food, which was served out of a coffin. When he died, he requested 12 old maids to follow his coffin to the grave, as well as a bagpiper and a fiddler to play happy music.